Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Community Platform on UCTV. We have a very interesting question and even more interesting person who's going to respond to the question today. Should masajids be thinking about reopening? Before we get to that question, let me tell you something about the gentleman who's going to respond to that question. I know him as a solicitor, but I was pleasantly surprised to learn that he's also a baker, and I'm quite intrigued actually. I was hoping that, we would be able to taste some of the stuff that he may be cooking. But let's see what he's cooking for us today. Assalamu alaikum, Nasir.
Wa
Assalamu
alaikum
alaikum, Nasir.
salam, Anjum. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it's an honor and pleasure. But I really need to know this. How on earth did you become a baker? And not only a baker, but you also won a prize, I believe.
Yes, I freshly prepare cakes, and I normally do this during Eid time, and then I distribute it to as many people as possible. So I'm well known for it. I've got photographic proof as well.
No, I'm afraid that won't do. We're going to have to invite you live, and the only way that you can do that is to bring some of your cakes with us. Now, let's get back into some serious conversation, and that's a very serious question, isn't it? Should masajid reopen? Who are we actually asking? I mean, should people be telling us to open, or should we as Muslims be deciding ourselves? What are the implications if the mosque were to reopen now?
Well, firstly, to rewind a little bit, the masjids, as well as all the places of worship, churches, synagogues, temples, etc., they've all been closed since the 26th of March 2020, when the regulation came in to close down places of worship. And the places of worship can only open for a number of specific uses, but it does not include congregational prayer. What it includes is all weddings. What it does include is for funerals, for providing essential services like blood donation, or for a minister of religion to carry out a broadcast. So the masjids at the moment have been closed for that time period, and a number of masjids are now, I'm sure, are keen to reopen, considering that there's been a number of changes to the lockdown rules that have been relaxed. So, for example, outdoor markets opened on Monday, so did car showrooms opened, schools have reopened from Monday. And then you've also had a number of businesses that have reopened, garden centres, etc. So masjids are asking themselves, well, can we not reopen? So I think there's a push from the masjids to ask the question, why can they not reopen?
I can see that if you think about schools opening or businesses opening, where they have the resources and also I think the knowledge to look at the safeties. Are our mosques really prepared, to open up? Because what about the distancing? What about people not being too close? Are we able to deal with that?
So in terms of, the other significant thing that's been allowed to reopen is sports players and people involved in training and competition. They're allowed to carry out those type of gatherings as well. So there's a number of gatherings that are now permitted. But in terms of masjids, whether what the criteria is for the masjid to reopen is, it really is, first of all, it's whether it's public health considerations that where the science says it's safe to do so. The risk of the rate of infections and the number of coronavirus cases won't increase to the extent that will overpower the NHS, and it's safe for the individual worshippers to go into and pray in a masjid. So the first and pretty much, the major consideration for any masjid who wants to reopen who are pushing the government to reopen is to look at the science, look at the medical evidence to look at that, whether that is something that can reasonably and safely done in the masjid. Just to answer directly the question is, from my point of view, is masjids involve the building and also the car park.
Yeah.
So my own looking at the medical evidence, looking at the science, taking into account also the mental and spiritual well-being of the Muslims as well. As long as certain things are in place, such as what you've mentioned, social distancing, of staying 2 meters apart, I don't see there being a high medium risk of infections and transmission of COVID-19 if the congregational prayer is done in the car park. At the moment, the law allows gatherings in public of a maximum of 6 people from different households. Before it was only 2. So at the moment, the way the law is that you can go to the park and you can mix, you can have a picnic, you can have a barbecue, you can go to the beach, but you can't carry out even the short, small 6 people congregational prayer in the car park. So I think there's a good argument to have to say that it's permitted in the car parks of the masjids. At the moment, it's not permitted, but I don't see there's a problem there. But in terms of the actual building, inside the building, I mean, that's got to be really, really carefully thought through. And one of the things I'm pushing masjid leaders to do through some of my video posts is to prepare and plan for reopening through the preparation of what is called a COVID-19 masjid risk assessment plan, which is a well thought out document which sets out what are all the risks associated to COVID-19 from entering the car park, then entering the building, then entering the rooms, and things like that. And then, what precautionary measures need to be put into place and who needs to put them into place. But masjid leaders need to really look at the public health issues. And if they have any specific recommendations that they want to put to government, one of the things I'm recommending the masjid leadership to do, the imams, the ulama, whoever's interested in masjids reopening, that their starting point is to commission an independent health report, which assesses the potential risks, whether they can manage whilst praying congregational prayer in the masjids, the actual building, and then put those specific recommendations based upon that independent report. If they do conclude that you can carry out congregational prayer in the masjid, to the government, and then they can push for legal changes that way. But without supporting medical evidence, without risk assessment plans being properly put into place, they should be very cautious about whether masjids should reopen. And even if the lockdown laws permit it, even if lockdown laws permit masjids reopening, like schools, the same schools can reopen. Even if masjids allowed to open, like churches and temples, some masjids may feel that they can't manage the risks because they don't have maybe a strong enough leadership to stop large numbers of people beyond the limits that the government might put to the regulations coming into the masjid. They may not feel that their building is big enough to hold even small gatherings in the masjid. So it's not a foregone conclusion, even if the lockdown laws relax and open, that masjid should reopen. Because it really does have to be carefully thought through. Because just imagine, Anjum, what would happen if something goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, and I think you've raised some very important issues and some very important points. I think you just mentioned that you can have a very strong leadership and they can control the crowd and they can dictate to what can be done and what can't be done, and then you would have some masajid where you don't have that kind of leadership. And I think the worry would be that the mosque who doesn't have those resources to say, well, if they can do it, we can. And I think that's where the fear would be. And as I said,
I have those concerns with children going to school or employees going into the workplace. Have they got the space, the resources? Have they got the employer who's going to provide all the precautionary things like face masks, face coverings, hand sanitizers, things like that? I think, but what it is what I'm trying to get the masjids to do now is think about it. Just think about reopening. Think about what things you would put into place. And that thought process will help them think about whether it's going to be safe for people to attend the masjid. They may come to the conclusion that it's not safe, but they may come to the conclusion it is safe. But it's really what they've got to think about is the precautionary measures they're going to be they would put into place if they've got them. A stockpile. Have they got sanitizers, for instance? Have they bought a stockpile of sanitizers? So when people are walking in and coming out, they're able to use them. If you don't have sanitizers, then you put people at infection risks. If you say, for example, if you have a small room, I'm talking about, and it only has one exit in and out of that room, that's not going to help social distancing.
Exactly.
So they've got to think very, very carefully, and that's why I think one of the options available that they should consider pushing forward, because I think it's only logical if markets are open, our showrooms are open, and garden centres are open, to think about doing congregational prayer, especially the large ones like the Jummah, to think about in the future to do it outside rather than inside the building. And they've got the time now, Anjum, they've got the time now to put things in place.
Absolutely. You're so right. And I think this may be an opportunity for all the masajids and the committee members to think about how they go forward. Because if this can happen in our lifetime, it can happen again. And I think we need to have that some policies in place to help people.
And to be fair to some of the masjid leadership, I read one letter from I think it was from one of the Northern Council of Masjids, they wrote a letter to the government to say, look, why can't we pray in the car park? And I think it's a good thing that they've done, thinking about it and writing, putting forward an argument.
Absolutely.
But if they're going to move from outside to inside, where the risk of human transmission is going to be high, human to human contact is going to be high, then they've got to commission someone to do some sort of specialist health report, taking into account also that COVID-19, for whatever reason, because it's yet to be looked into properly, why it particularly affects BME communities. And we're part of the majority of Muslims are part of BME communities. So there's going to be an argument against masjids reopening on that based on that factor. It may be because BME communities come from low income, poor they've got poor dietary, likely to have poor dietary. BME may be on the front line more than say their white counterparts, etc., because of allegations or accusations or assertions that people are being discriminated against. But the point is that it's got to be really, really thought through. This is I don't want people, masjid leaders, to just think this is a lockdown rule, relaxes, opens the masjid up and you let people in, because they've really got to think it through, and I want them to think it through, because it's the safety of our parents, of our uncles, aunties, our cousins, our relatives, our friends. We don't want them to fall ill, and we don't want them to be affected in this way. So that's why I'm pushing the masjids
No, you're doing a brilliant job. I want to carry on with this conversation, but Nasir, we're just going to take a very short break, and we will be back within the next 60 seconds. So don't go away. Keep watching. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Community Platform. Just before break, we've been discussing about should masajid be thinking about reopening, what are the pitfalls, and yes, we miss our mosques, we miss the activities in our masajid, but health and safety comes first. Nasir, can you take us through some of the processes that the mosque will need to have if they are thinking about reopening?
So what they need to do is they need to basically prepare they need to think about and prepare two documents. One is a COVID-19 risk assessment plan. They need to also consider preparing and thinking about a contingency action plan. So the first one is the risk assessment plan, which is where they need to get support from two people, two experts. One is a specialist risk assessment person who will help the individuals in the masjid prepare this risk assessment plan, which basically is identifying the risks of COVID-19. So, for example, if you go into a room and there's a hard surface in that room, or there's drink in that room, or there's food in that room, what is the risks of having people touching hard surfaces, eating in the masjid? What's the risks of people walking through a particular entrance if that entrance is quite narrow, or that corridor? So it's also identifying what precautionary measures are going to be put into place to stop that. So, for example, one route in, one route out. It's also about naming the individuals, committed individuals in that masjid who will, tell people, instruct people, you cannot enter the masjid without using this hand sanitizer. You cannot, you cannot enter the masjid without a face covering. You have to have a plastic bag, say for example, to put your shoes in. You're going to, if you have symptoms like temperature or persistent cough, you cannot come into the masjid. There needs to be appropriate notices. So all of these things are in the risk assessment plan, and it is not something which is a template, which is very important for me to say this. Because each building, each masjid, each car park is different. The individuals are different. The law and guidance may change over time. So this risk assessment plan needs to be a specific plan for that particular masjid. Off-the-shelf templates is not going to work because they're just going to be a copy and paste job. The other plan that they need to have is a contingency action plan. So, for example, what that means is just imagine if something goes wrong. Just imagine if we hear that our local imam has become ill, and maybe one of the trustees or the committee members has tested positive for COVID-19. So this is something that's happened, an occurrence of the risk potentially has happened. So what is the masjid going to do? Have they thought about what they would do? Are they going to maybe close the room? Are they going to move to a different room? Are they going to move from inside to outside? Are they going to close the masjid down? How long are they going to close that masjid down, the building? You know, all of these things need to be thought through in a contingency action plan. You know, with the idea that people who are with the idea of tracking the test, track and trace, and the use of the app, you know, if that app shows that there's been a number of individuals associated to an individual who you've been regularly praying with in the masjid, and that individual has tested positive or shows symptoms, what that means, then you've got to isolate yourself. And what that also means is that who do you alert in the masjid, and what actions will the masjid then take? So these are contingency action plans. So that's what has to also happen. And in addition to the risk assessment plan, in addition to the contingency action plan, what also needs to happen as well is that if there's a group of scholars, imams, religious leaders, masjid that want to reopen and want to push the government to reopen, and they need to have a workout plan and recommendations based upon evidence that they have gathered and garnered, which are specialist public health officials who will be able to prepare recommendations, if you can have any recommendations for masjids reopening, and those need to be fed into government thinking about changing legislation to allow masjids to open. So they may even come up with a recommendation, Anjum, that says, well, I think reasonably and safely, we think that masjid congregational prayer can take place in the car park. So that needs to specifically amend that. So it may say that depending on the size of the masjid rooms, depending on whether there's an entry and exit, depending on the space, the whatever, it can hold, and you know, the number of people that can be reasonably socially distanced from each other, you can have a certain amount of individuals in that place to pray congregationally. And I think that those type of recommendations need to come through some kind of report written by specialist public health experts in infectious diseases that can be the basis for any push for legal change to the government, without which, you know, I don't think change is going to take place unless you're relying on the government own advisors and experts to say it's reasonably safe.
Nasir, you have taken the initiative actually to produce a document. I'm sorry, I've not had a chance to see that document. Is that document in the public domain?
Not yet.
Can it be made into... Because, you see, what I'm thinking, on the ground is that somebody has to take the lead role in educating not only the committee members, but the leadership of the MASAJIDS to say, well, look, these are the processes that you have to put in before you even think about opening. Because if that is not happening, if the processes are not being explained, you are one person. Is there an organization that is taking some sort of initiative?
To be fair to organisations, there are organisations out there that are doing this work, that are thinking about this work, and are producing documents. But what it is with me, I'm quite specific in the detail because I think the detail is missing from some of the work that I've seen. So, you know, when I talk about a report prepared by independent medical experts, health professionals on infectious diseases, and making a specific recommendation whether masjids should open, and if they are going to open, in what way. You know, nobody's really thought about that. You know, commissioning people to carry out this work, almost like an independent. You know, the government's got SAGE, these experts. But I'm sort of like talking like that, whereby there's an independent experts that would advise MASAJIDS, and they know about MASAJIDS, you know, the big ones, the small ones, the house, the purpose-built ones, etc. And the other thing, so I think that's missing in our community, that there's that push for that type of process whereby somebody's, you know, a group of 3 experts or 5 experts come together and they think about, okay, is it possible? knowing what we know about COVID-19, knowing about how it transmits to human, knowing about how our masjids look like and feel, can we make these recommendations to reopen? And if we are, how many numbers are we talking about? Which rooms are we talking about? What precautionary measures are we talking about? And then the other thing I've tried to push for is, to avoid risk assessment templates and just, for the masjid themselves to think for themselves, think, and if they need help thinking about what those risks are, they should rely on risk assessors, and they should rely on individuals in our community who are doctors and nurses and infectious disease practitioners, to use their expertise and to use the general report that's prepared by these Muslim organisations, and to utilise some of the recommendations put generally out there, and to then to bespoke it, make it individual to their masjid, and include it into a risk assessment plan. And then at the same time, I'm really specific and saying, look, worst case scenario, what happens when worst case scenario happens? What should you do? And I think if we do this right, if we get this right, we will keep everybody who attends the masjid as safe as possible. We will we'll have confidence with the wider society that we are keeping masjids and those who are attending safe. We will be complying with Charity Commission. We will avoid any risk of any complaints or claims against the masjids, because they've done everything they have to do. And then the rest you leave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they've got to use this time, because I'm hearing that they're going to be reopening the masjids possibly end of June, beginning of July. But just because the law says you can reopen, just like the law says you can reopen a school, or you can open sports fields for football, it doesn't mean that you then reopen it. You've still got to think about it.
Yeah. I think we've just had I think it's a question or a remark that's been posted to us from somebody in Blackburn, a gentleman by the name of Raja. He's saying, should Masajid should appoint a health and safety lead? Would that?
Yes. Yeah, so the person that needs, so each masjid, so on my videos I said each masjid should somebody to prepare the risk assessment plan and the contingency action plan. Yes, definitely. And that person then needs to refer to these two experts to prepare this plan. And then that individual needs to be the point of contact to implement that plan in that particular masjid. What the organisations that are supporting the masjid, like the national Muslim organisations out there, what they need to do is, they can produce guidance and advice, which is fine. But really, what they should be doing now is instructing formally a group of experts to look at masjids about whether it's safe to open, and if they are going to open, how will they open? In the car park, inside, and make certain other specific recommendations. But yes, in short, they should have an individual who will be allocated to carry out this task, not just for the preparation of the risk assessment plan or the contingency action plan, but to be the one who is implementing it, not just for 1 week, but for the whole period of the pandemic.
This conversation needs to have a part 1 and part 2, because it's very important and it's very relevant, and it's something that we need. I want you to stay online, Nasir. Our time is up, but I would like you to stay online because I just want to have a conversation before we switch off. But thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, for giving up to be with us. It's so important that the mindset of our community leadership, particularly the religious leadership, opens up to a new set of ideas. And I think that's what Nasir has been talking about, is exactly that unless we have a process, we cannot achieve the aims and objectives and the safety of our community. And I think that's very important. And a gentleman who posted something that maybe we need health and safety specialist to be appointed by a mosque, maybe not by every mosque because we don't have those kind of resources, but certainly as a collective organization should do that. It's a mindset that we need to change. Unless we do that, I think we're risking, and the risking of the lives of our young people, our elderly, our mothers, our sisters. And it's something that you need to think about and something that you need to challenge. We want our masajids to be opened. Of course we want it to open, but we need them to be open safely so that our children, our brother and sister are all safe. I'm very grateful for you allowing me and Nasir to come into your homes. Join me again next week. Until then, look after yourself, remain safe, and I will see you inshallah next week. Jazakallah khair.